The Galactic Fine Print. Chapter 1. The Writ of Occupation. The sky over Nova Calum didn't turn black from clouds, but from metal. A Qulani dreadnought, 5 kilometers of iridescent bronze hull, slid into the upper atmosphere with the silent, terrifying grace of a predator. Below, in the capital of New Hope, the air grew heavy with the smell of ionized particles and the frantic heat of a world realizing its sovereignty was about to end. People stood in the streets, necks craned upward, watching as the massive shadow swallowed their sun. In the governor's office, the atmosphere was even thicker. The walls, made of local sandstone and reinforced steel, seemed to vibrate with the low-frequency hum of the alien ship's engines. Elena Ross, the governor of Nova Calum, stared at the primary display. Her hands clenched so tightly, her knuckles were white.
Get me a tactical readout. How many railgun batteries do we have online? Can we even scratch that thing?
She demanded, her voice cracking with a mixture of fury and desperation. She adjusted her flight suit, the fabric damp with sweat.
Tactical analysis. 0% chance of successful defense. The Qulani vessel has deployed quad-layered kinetic shields. We are outgunned by a ratio of 10,000 to 1.
The colony AI replied, its voice cold and monotonous, flickering on the wall monitors. Elena swore under her breath, turning away from the window.
Then why haven't they fired? They've been sitting there for an hour. If they wanted us dead, we'd be ash by now,
she muttered, pacing the length of the room. Suddenly the main terminal chimed, not with a red combat alert, but with a blue notification.
Incoming transmission. Data package received. File size, 4 gigabytes. Format, juridical encoding.
The AI announced. Elena blinked, her brow furrowing in confusion.
A 4-gigabyte file? Is it a virus, a manifesto?
She asked, leaning over the console.
It is a legal document. Title: The Ancestral Edict of Subsector 7. 4,000 pages of Qulani high script.
The AI clarified. Elena stared at the scrolling text, a mountain of complex geometric symbols that meant absolutely nothing to her. She let out a dry, hollow laugh.
They aren't invading us with lasers. They're invading us with a lawsuit. Fine. If they want to play games, let's find the biggest shark on this rock. Where is Arthur Vance?
She asked, a spark of hope finally igniting in her eyes. 2 miles away, in a quiet residential district, Arthur Vance was kneeling in the dirt. He was 58 years old, his salt and pepper hair dusted with the red soil of the planet. He was carefully pruning a hybrid rosebush, his movements slow and deliberate. He wore a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms that had spent more time holding pens than shovels until 3 years ago. The roar of the dreadnought overhead didn't make him flinch. He simply adjusted his horn-rimmed glasses and reached for a pair of shears.
You're late, Elena. I assume the giant bronze bird in the sky is the reason,
Arthur said without looking up, as the governor's armored transport screeched to a halt behind him. Elena jumped out before the vehicle had even fully stopped.
Arthur, they've sent us a 4,000-page eviction notice. They say this entire system belongs to the Qulani Hegemony, based on a treaty signed before humans discovered fire. We have 24 hours to vacate or be liquidated as squatters,
she shouted, her voice trembling. Arthur finally stood up, wiping the dirt from his knees. He looked at the massive ship, his gray eyes narrowing behind his lenses. A small, almost imperceptible smile played at the corners of his mouth.
24 hours. How rude. They haven't even offered us tea first. Did they send the full document or just the executive summary?
He asked, his tone as calm as if they were discussing the weather.
The whole thing. The AI is still trying to translate the legal jargon. Arthur, we're talking about a forced evacuation of 500,000 people. We need a miracle,
Elena pleaded, grabbing his arm. Arthur patted her hand gently, his expression shifting from that of a gardener to something far more dangerous.
A miracle. No, Elena. Miracles are for the desperate. What you need is a man who knows how to find a typo in a galactic constitution. Go back to the office. Tell the Qulani that Nova Kylum acknowledges receipt of the writ. Tell them we require a formal pretrial hearing in accordance with the universal statutes of sentient claims,"
he said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming the sharp, resonant instrument that had once dismantled multi-trillion-dollar corporations on Earth.
Do those statutes even exist?
Elena whispered, staring at him. Arthur picked up his suit jacket from a nearby bench, shaking it out.
"If they don't, I'll invent them by the time we reach the shuttle. But knowing the Qulani, they have a rule for everything. And that, Elena, is exactly how I'm going to bury them,"
he replied, sliding into the jacket and adjusting his tie with surgical precision. An hour later, a holographic projection flickered to life in the center of the governor's boardroom. It was High Arbiter Zalthor. The alien was magnificent and terrifying. Bronze scales shimmering, 4 eyes blinking in an alternating rhythm. His golden robes floated around him, and his feathered crest was a deep, arrogant blue.
"Humans, I am High Arbiter Zalthor. Your presence on this world is a statistical error, a violation of the hegemony's ancestral land rights. You have 23 hours remaining. Surrender your infrastructure and prepare for deportation."
The alien's voice boomed through the speakers, translated into a cold, synthetic English. Arthur stepped forward into the light of the projector, holding a thin data slate. He looked tiny compared to the giant alien, but he didn't look afraid.
"High Arbiter Zalthor, I presume. My name is Arthur Vance, Chief Legal Counsel for the Sovereign Colony of Nova Kylum. I've had a chance to skim your Writ of Occupation. It's quite an amateurish piece of work, isn't it?"
Arthur said, his voice smooth as silk. The alien's crest flashed a sharp, startled red.
"Amateurish. It is the divine law of the Qulani. It is infallible."
Zalthor hissed, his 2 smaller eyes narrowing. Arthur leaned in, his glasses reflecting the holographic glow.
"Oh, it's cute. But according to Section 8, Paragraph 12 of your own Hegemony Administrative Code, any claim of ancestral land must be verified by a physical inspection of the boundaries by a duly appointed officer of the court, alongside a representative of the current occupants. Until that inspection is completed and signed in triplicate on physical medium, no eviction can take place,"
Arthur stated, tapping his slate. Zalthor paused, his crest turning a confused shade of gray.
"We do not use physical medium. We are beyond such primitive tools,"
the alien countered. Arthur's smile widened, revealing a row of perfectly white teeth.
"Then I suggest you start looking for some paper, Arbiter, because until you land and walk every inch of this planet's border with me, this ship of yours isn't a warship. It's an illegal obstruction of planetary airspace, and I'm already billing you for the parking fees,"
Arthur said, his eyes gleaming with the predatory light of a lawyer who had just found his first loophole. Chapter 2. The 24-Hour Miracle. The governor's war room was a tomb of flickering blue light and the low, anxious hum of cooling fans. Outside, the night was artificial. The massive Qulani dreadnought blocked the moons, casting a permanent, suffocating shadow over the city. Inside, Arthur Vance was buried under a mountain of holographic data fields. He hadn't slept. His tie was loosened, his top button undone, and a cold cup of synthetic coffee sat forgotten at his elbow. The red dust of Nova Kylum had settled into the creases of his face, making him look older, but his eyes were unnervingly bright. Governor Elena Ross stood by the window, watching the silent silhouettes of the colony's defense turrets. They looked like toothpicks compared to the celestial fortress hanging above them. She turned to Arthur, her shadow long and jagged against the stone floor.
Arthur, it's been 6 hours since your little parking fee stunt. The Qulani haven't fired, but they've started landing shuttles. Hundreds of them. They're swarming the northern plains. Are they preparing for the inspection?
She asked, her voice tight with the exhaustion of a commander waiting for a blow that wouldn't land. Arthur didn't look up from his data slate, his fingers dancing across the interface.
Not an inspection, Elena. A shortcut. Zalthor is trying to outmaneuver me. He's deploying automated surveyor drones to scan the boundaries. He thinks he can satisfy the physical inspection requirement with a high-resolution 3D map.
Arthur muttered, a dry, raspy chuckle escaping his throat. He finally leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight.
And can he? If those drones finish the scan, does the eviction notice become active?
Elena pressed, walking over to his desk. She looked at the screen, which was filled with thousands of lines of glowing geometric script.
On paper? Perhaps. But I've been digging into the Qulani Codex of Universal Order. It's a fascinating document, Elena. It was written 12,000 years ago by a species that viewed bureaucracy as a form of worship. To them, a rule isn't just a law, it's a physical constant of the universe, like gravity.
Arthur explained, picking up a heavy, leather-bound book he had brought from his personal library, a relic of Earth's legal history.
I found a subclause in their administrative verification protocols. Section 99, subparagraph omega. It states that any boundary dispute involving biological entities of Class 3 or higher, that's us, must be verified by a sensory witness of the High Court. Drones don't have senses, Elena. They have sensors. In Qulani law, there is a massive difference.
Arthur's voice was filled with a predatory satisfaction. He tapped the screen, highlighting a specific rune.
So, you're going to tell them the drones don't count? They'll just send a soldier down to look at the dirt. That doesn't buy us much time.
Elena sighed, rubbing her temples. Arthur stood up, smoothing his waistcoat.
Oh, I'm counting on them sending someone. In fact, I'm counting on Zalthor himself. Because once he steps foot on the soil to act as a sensory witness, he becomes subject to the Colonial Hospitality and Labor Act of 2142.
He said, reaching for his suit jacket.
Incoming communication. Hi, Arbiter. Zalthor requests immediate audience. Audio only.
The AI interrupted. Arthur signaled for the AI to patch it through. The room filled with the sharp, clicking sounds of the Qulani language before the translator kicked in.
Human Vance, your obstructionism is noted. My surveyors have completed 40% of the planetary radius. We will have our verification by midday. Prepare your people for the first wave of processing.
Zalthor's voice was like grinding stones, cold and utterly certain of victory. Arthur leaned over the console, his voice dropping into a professional, almost bored tone.
Arbiter, I'm afraid I have some distressing news regarding your drones. According to your own Codex, Section 99, subparagraph omega, a non-sentient sensor cannot provide legal testimony of terrain. Your current data is, quite frankly, inadmissible in a court of law. It's essentially digital graffiti.
Arthur said, pausing for effect. There was a long, static-filled silence from the other end.
Graffiti? The sensors are calibrated to within a micron. They are more accurate than any biological eye.
Zalthor shouted, his voice vibrating with a sudden, sharp, red-hued anger.
Accuracy is irrelevant, Arbiter. Legitimacy is everything. If you want this colony vacated, you need a sensory witness to personally walk the perimeter. And since you are the presiding official of this writ, that witness is you.
Arthur stated, his smile invisible but audible in his voice.
You expect me, the High Arbiter of the 7th Sector, to walk on the dirt, to measure land like a peasant?
The alien hissed. Arthur adjusted his glasses, his expression turning cold.
Unless you'd like to explain to your High Court why you ignored the ancestral protocols in favor of convenience, I believe the penalty for procedural negligence in the hegemony is, what was it? Lifelong exile to a mining moon?
Arthur's bluff was a calculated gamble. He didn't know the penalty, but he knew the Qulani feared disorder more than death. The silence on the line stretched for nearly a minute.
I will descend. I will witness. And once the last measurement is taken, human, I will personally oversee the deconstruction of your city.
Zalthor growled, the connection cut out with a sharp click. Elena stared at Arthur, her jaw dropped.
You actually got him to come down here. But Arthur, he's going to be furious, and he'll finish the walk in a few days. We're still dead,
she whispered. Arthur turned back to his desk, grabbing a thick stack of printed papers, actual physical paper, a rarity on the colony.
He'll be furious, yes, but he'll also be a visiting dignitary under the 2142 Act. And according to our local laws, which he technically acknowledged by requesting an audience, any dignitary who enters a work zone without a safety permit is subject to a mandatory 48-hour safety briefing.
Arthur chuckled, his eyes gleaming behind his glasses.
And that briefing, Elena, is delivered via a series of 150 separate forms, each requiring a handwritten signature in ink.
He added, holding up an old fountain pen.
You're not just stalling him. You're burying him in a landslide of paperwork,
Elena said, a slow, disbelieving smile spreading across her face.
Not just paperwork, Elena. I'm requesting a full lineage audit. If they want to claim this land based on who their ancestors were, they have to prove who they are, to the last generation. I'm going to make the High Arbiter of the Hegemony explain his great-great-grandfather's tax returns before he can even think about kicking us off this rock,
Arthur said, standing tall. He looked at the massive ship above, no longer a predator, but a target.
Pack a bag, Elena. We're going to board that flagship. I have a lot of forms to file and very little time to do it.
Chapter 3. Death by 1,000 Forms. The interior of the Qulani flagship, the Ascendant Logic, was a cathedral of cold, white light and humming anti-gravity fields. There were no stairs, only shimmering lifts that transported the spindly, bronze-scaled aliens between levels of shifting geometric architecture. The air was thin, smelling of ozone and a strange, floral chemical that made Elena's throat itch. Arthur Vance, however, looked perfectly at home. He walked across the polished, translucent floors with his briefcase in hand, his leather soles clicking rhythmically. A sharp, primitive sound that seemed to grate on the nerves of the Qulani guards, watching them. High Arbiter Zalthor sat atop a floating dais in the center of a massive command hub. His 4 eyes were fixed on a series of cascading data streams, his feathered crest a restless, agitated purple. As Arthur and Elena approached, the dais lowered with a soft hiss of escaping gas.
You are bold, human, to step onto the heart of the hegemony while your world hangs by a thread. Do you have the boundary coordinates, or have you come to beg for a reprieve?
Zalthor asked, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. He didn't look down at them. He looked through them.
Neither, actually. I've come to discuss the protocol of tangible evidence as outlined in the hegemony's own venerable statutes of occupation,
Arthur replied, opening his briefcase with a deliberate click-clack. He pulled out a thick stack of physical paper and held it up.
What is this organic debris?
Zalthor hissed, one of his smaller eyes twitching in distaste.
This is the Atmospheric Usage and Resource Extraction Permit, Arbiter. You see, your Writ of Occupation claims this planet is an ancestral Qulani territory. By your own logic, you are not invaders, you are returning residents.
Arthur explained, his voice smooth and professional. He began laying out the papers on a nearby floating console, covering the glowing alien interfaces with dull white sheets.
Correct. It is our land, our air,
Zalthor stated, his crest shifting back to a confident blue.
Exactly. And according to the Interstellar Environmental Protection Compact, which the Qulani signed 300 years ago, any resident extracting more than 10,000 liters of oxygen-nitrogen mix per hour from a protected biosphere must file a consumption impact report in a physical indelible format to prevent digital tampering,
Arthur said, leaning in. He pointed to a small line of text on one of the pages.
Every one of your soldiers, every crew member on this ship is currently breathing without a permit. Technically, you are all in violation of Environmental Statute 404. Each breath is a separate finable offense,
Arthur added, his eyes cold behind his glasses. Elena stood behind him, trying her best to keep a straight face. She could see the confusion beginning to ripple through the Qulani bridge crew.
This is absurd. We do not recognize these tiny scraps of pulp.
Zalthor roared, his crest turning a violent blood red.
Oh, you don't have to recognize them, but your ship's central computer will. I've already transmitted a formal notice of compliance failure to your fleet's automated legal core. Check your secondary logs, Arbiter.
Arthur suggested, gesturing toward the main display. Zalthor barked a command in his native tongue. A moment later, the golden light of the hub flickered, replaced by a flashing amber warning. A synthetic, crystalline voice filled the room.
Warning. Compliance breach detected. Statute 404. Resource misappropriation. All non-essential biological functions are subject to an administrative hold. Until forms are filed, kinetic activity is restricted to preserve system assets.
The ship's own AI announced. Suddenly, the Qulani guards found their power armor locking up, the joints whining as the onboard computers forced them into a low-energy stance.
You infected my ship with a virus.
Zalthor screamed, struggling to stand as his own robes' gravity stabilizers began to fluctuate.
Not a virus, Arbiter. A fact. I simply reminded your computer of the rules you yourselves wrote. Your AI is programmed to be perfectly law-abiding. It cannot allow you to break the law even if you want to.
Arthur said, picking up a pen and offering it to the alien.
Now, if you want your soldiers to be able to move again, you just need to sign these 312 consumption waivers. And since you're the commanding officer, I'll also need your full lineage audit to verify you have the authority to sign on behalf of the hegemony.
Arthur's voice was relentless. He watched as Zalthor's crest faded to a dull, defeated gray.
Arthur, look.
Elena whispered, pointing to the windows. The smaller escort ships surrounding the dreadnought were beginning to drift, their engines glowing with the dim light of safety idle mode. The entire fleet was being paralyzed by its own rigid adherence to protocol.
This will take days. The evacuation deadline will pass.
Zalthor moaned, his 4 eyes staring in horror at the mountain of paperwork Arthur was now stacking on his dais.
Actually, Arbiter, it gets worse. While you're filling those out, I've also filed a motion for discovery regarding your ancestral claim. Since you've technically declared yourselves residents, you are now subject to the colony's labor and tax code.
Arthur said, his smile turning truly predatory.
By landing your shuttles in our northern plains, you have performed unregulated land development. You are now, legally speaking, unregistered seasonal workers, and in Nova Calum, unregistered workers are required to undergo a mandatory 72-hour orientation on local wildlife safety before they can perform any further actions.
He explained, pulling a second, even larger stack of papers from his briefcase.
I'm not a worker. I am an arbiter of the High Court.
Zalthor screeched, his feathers puffing out in a desperate display of dominance.
Not according to Form B12, you aren't. According to that form, which your AI just accepted, you are a junior land surveyor level 1. Welcome to the workforce, Arbiter. I suggest you start signing. The ink takes a few minutes to dry, and we have a very long afternoon ahead of us.
Arthur said, leaning back and crossing his arms. The silence on the bridge was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic, mechanical hum of the ship's struggling life support and the distant, panicked clicking of Qulani officers trying to bypass their own unbreakable laws. Arthur Vance, the man with the fountain pen, had just turned a galactic invasion into a middle management nightmare. Chapter 4. The Sovereign Trap. The bridge of the ascendant logic had transformed into a bureaucratic disaster zone. The sleek, white surfaces were buried under thousands of sheets of physical paper, affidavits, waivers, and tax forms that fluttered every time the ventilation hummed. High Arbiter Zalthor was hunched over a floating desk, his golden robes stained with ink from a leaking fountain pen. His 4 eyes were bloodshot, twitching as they scanned line 456 of a petroleum and ion drive emissions liability form. Around him, his officers were in a state of catatonic shock, their power armor still locked in compliance mode. Arthur Vance stood by the massive view screen, looking out at the colony of Nova Kylum below. He looked remarkably refreshed, having taken a short nap in one of the ship's high-gravity pods. Elena Ross stood beside him, watching the horizon where a new ship was appearing, a silver needle-like vessel that hummed with a different, more ancient frequency.
Arthur, another one is coming. It's smaller, but the energy signature is off the charts. Is that a reinforcement ship? Are they finally going to stop the paperwork and just blow us up?
Elena whispered, her hand resting on the holster of her sidearm. Arthur didn't even turn around. He was busy polishing his glasses with a silk handkerchief.
That, Elena, is the final auditor of the Qulani High Court. I sent a priority subpoena through their own diplomatic channel 3 hours ago. I've officially sued the hegemony for illegal parking in a residential zone and unlawful emotional distress of livestock,
Arthur said, his voice light and airy.
Emotional distress of... what? We don't even have cows on this colony, Arthur. We have synthetic protein vats.
Elena hissed, staring at him as if he had finally lost his mind. Arthur turned, a twinkle of pure mischief in his eyes.
We have 3 domestic cats and a very sensitive golden retriever belonging to the baker's daughter. According to Qulani law, Title 12, sentient companions are legally classified as high-value livestock. The shadow of this dreadnought has disrupted their sleeping patterns. The damages I'm seeking are substantial,
he explained, gesturing toward Zalthor, who let out a low, mournful click of despair.
12 billion credits. He is asking for 12 billion hegemony credits for a golden retriever.
Zalthor moaned, his crest a dull, sickly gray. He looked at Arthur with genuine terror.
You are a monster, human. No warrior in the galaxy would fight like this. It is dishonorable,
the alien shouted, his voice cracking. Arthur stepped toward the dais, his expression suddenly hardening. The polite mask slipped, revealing the cold iron of a man who had spent decades destroying corporate empires.
Dishonorable. You came here to steal the homes of 500,000 people because of a piece of paper written 10,000 years ago. You didn't want to fight, Arbiter. You wanted a foreclosure. Well, consider this the countersuit from hell,
Arthur said, his voice echoing through the silent bridge. The doors to the bridge slid open with a chime that sounded like a funeral bell. A tall, impossibly thin Qulani entered. His scales were a matte black, and he wore a veil of shimmering data filaments. This was High Judge Valerius, the ultimate authority on Qulani law. He didn't look at the humans. He looked at the mess of paper and the paralyzed guards.
High Arbiter Zalthor, explain the state of this vessel. Why is the mission log stalled? Why have 12,000 legal actions been filed against the hegemony in the last 6 hours?
The judge asked, his voice a cold, vibrating bass that made the floor tiles shiver.
Excellency, the human. He found the old codes. He is weaponizing the protocols.
Zalthor stammered, falling to his knees. The High Judge turned his gaze to Arthur. For a long moment, the two of them stared at each other. One a master of galactic law, the other a master of human malicious compliance.
High Judge, I'm glad you're here. I'd like to draw your attention to the transparency trap regarding Subsector 7. Your arbiter here has failed to provide a certificate of habitation for the ancestral claimants. Without it, this entire fleet is technically trespassing on a sovereign human economic zone,
Arthur said, holding out a single tiny piece of paper. The High Judge took it, his long fingers trembling slightly as he scanned the text.
This is a municipal zoning permit from the colony's founding,
the judge noted, his crest turning a thoughtful, shimmering silver.
Precisely. And since your hegemony hasn't paid its non-resident occupancy tax for the last century, since you claim you owned it all along, the accumulated interest alone is enough to buy this entire dreadnought, 3 times over,
Arthur stated, leaning back against the console.
So here is the deal, Judge. You can proceed with the eviction. But the moment you do, I will trigger a galactic bankruptcy filing against the hegemony. Your assets will be frozen, your ships will be impounded by the Interstellar Bank, and you, personally, will be tied up in human probate court for the next 400 years.
Arthur's voice was a low, dangerous growl. He let the words hang in the air, heavy with the weight of 1,000 legal precedents.
400 years of human probate.
The judge whispered, his iridescent eyes wide with a fear that exceeded any threat of a nuclear strike. He looked at Zalthor, then at the mountain of paperwork, then back at the small, smiling human in the charcoal suit.
Arthur, you've got them.
Elena whispered, her eyes wide with awe. She watched as the high judge slowly lowered his head in a gesture of absolute surrender.
Human Vance, I believe a settlement is in order.
The judge said, his voice hollow. Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out a fresh, gold-tipped fountain pen.
I thought you'd see it my way, Judge. Now let's talk about the perpetual non-interference clause, and I'm going to need it signed in blood, or, well, whatever that blue ink you have in your veins is.
Arthur said, his smile as sharp as a razor. The trap was sprung, and the Qulani Hegemony was about to learn that the deadliest part of a human wasn't his heart, but his fine print. Chapter 5. The Settlement. The bridge of the ascendant logic felt less like a warship and more like a morgue for lost ambitions. High Judge Valerius stood motionless, his matte black scales reflecting the flickering data screens. Around him, the once proud Qulani officers were slumped in their chairs, surrounded by the physical debris of Arthur's legal assault. Thousands of white pages lay scattered across the floor like snow. High Arbiter Zalthor was still trembling, his hands stained dark blue from the leaking pens he had used to sign the first 500 waivers. Arthur Vance adjusted his cufflinks, looking as fresh as the moment he had stepped onto the ship. He pulled a single golden-edged document from his briefcase. It wasn't thousands of pages long. It was only one. But to the Qulani, it was more terrifying than a supernova.
This is the Nova Calum Accord, Judge. It's a simple, elegant document. It declares this system a sovereign legal dead zone for the hegemony. You acknowledge that our right to this world is based on prior interstellar squatters' rights, which, as you know, supersedes ancestral claims if the claimants haven't performed a physical census in over a millennium.
Arthur explained, his voice echoing in the vast, silent hub. He laid the paper on the judge's console, right on top of a pile of emotional distress claims.
And if I sign this, the litigation stops? The bankruptcy filings are withdrawn? The 400 years of probate disappear?
Whore? High Judge Valerius asked, his voice barely a whisper. His crest was a dull, defeated gray, his iridescent eyes wide with the exhaustion of a mind that had been pulverized by human logic.
Every single one. I'll even throw in a mutual release of liability clause. It means we won't sue you for the parking fees and you won't sue us for existing. We both walk away and you never, ever come back to this sector. Not for war, not for trade, not even for a flyby.
Arthur promised, offering the golden fountain pen.
Arthur, are you sure? We're just letting them go? After they threatened to wipe us out?
Elena Ross whispered, leaning close to Arthur. Her hand was still on her pistol, her eyes wary of the hundreds of armed guards who were currently paralyzed by a low-energy compliance mode.
Elena, in the world of law, a clean exit is better than a messy victory. If we keep fighting, their high court might eventually find a way to bypass my loops. But if they sign this, they are legally bound by their own core programming to leave us alone forever. To a Qulani, a signed contract isn't just a promise, it's reality.
Arthur replied softly, his eyes never leaving the judge. Valerius looked at the pen. He looked at the document. He looked at Zalthor, who was currently trying to figure out if he needed to file a form to ask for a glass of water. With a slow, heavy movement, the high judge took the pen. He signed his name in a complex, flowing script that shimmered with a faint blue light.
It is done. The hegemony relinquishes all claims to the system known as Nova Kylum. We will depart immediately.
The judge announced. He looked at Arthur one last time, a flicker of genuine curiosity in his 4 eyes.
Tell me, human, your species. You are young. You are fragile. How did you learn to weaponize order in such a way? We have ruled the stars for eons, yet we were defeated by the very systems we created to protect us.
The alien asked, his voice filled with a strange, weary respect. Arthur smiled, a small, sad expression.
You see, Judge, humans didn't start with order. We started with chaos. We spent thousands of years trying to keep each other from killing one another over pieces of land and bags of gold. We didn't build our laws to be perfect. We built them to be an obstacle course for the greedy. We've been practicing malicious compliance since we lived in caves. You adopted the law as a religion. We adopted it as a sport.
Arthur said, closing his briefcase with a final, satisfying thud. Less than an hour later, the massive bronze shadow over Nova Kylum began to lift. The Ascendant Logic and its escort fleet fired their thrusters, not with the roar of a conquering army, but with the hurried speed of a debtor fleeing a bill collector. The sun broke through the clouds, bathing the colony in the warm, golden light of a late afternoon. Arthur and Elena stood on the landing pad of the governor's mansion, watching the shimmering dots of the fleet disappear into the blackness of space. The air was fresh again, free of the metallic ozone smell of the alien ships. Elena let out a long, shaky breath, her shoulders finally dropping from their defensive hunch.
We actually survived. 500,000 people saved by, what, a few thousand pieces of paper and a gold-tipped pen?
She asked, looking at Arthur as if she were seeing him for the first time. Arthur took off his glasses and wiped them on his tie, his gray eyes looking tired but peaceful.
Never underestimate the power of the fine print, Elena. The universe is a big, dangerous place, filled with monsters and machines, but no matter how advanced they get, they all have to follow some kind of rule. And as long as there are rules, there's a human who can find a way to break them legally.
He said, putting his glasses back on.
What are you going to do now? The colony's legal department is going to want you to lead them. You're a hero, Arthur.
Elena said, a hint of a smile on her face. Arthur looked toward his small house in the residential district where his roses were still waiting to be pruned.
A hero? No, I'm just a man who hates to see a good rosebush go to waste because of a zoning dispute. I'm going back to my garden, Elena, but keep that fountain pen. I suspect that sooner or later someone else will come along claiming they own the sky, and I'll need to be ready to tell them why they're wrong.
Arthur replied, patting his pocket. He turned and walked away, his steps light on the red soil of Nova Kylum. Above, the stars were coming out, cold, distant, and filled with ancient empires. But for the first time in history, those empires knew to be afraid of the primitive inhabitants of the third rock. Because humanity didn't just have fire and steel, they had the one thing that could paralyze a god, a well-placed, legally binding, and utterly malicious loophole. Humanity hadn't just joined the galactic community. They had audited it, and the galaxy would never be the same again.